Good morning, everybody. So today I'm doing my September forecast, and I will be coming on right after this to do a short period of free one-card readings. So if you guys want to tune in afterwards, I will be doing that. So this is the deck that I'm using. This is called the Karma Cards by Monte Farber. And it's a really different deck because it basically forms a series of sentences. So I've picked the 3 cards, and the cards are the planets, signs, and houses. And I'll hold up the cards so you can see what I mean. It's really interesting the way they work. I'm just going to give you a sense of this. If you've never seen this deck, it's quite intriguing. So you read across, and you get the situation for the ones at the top, and then when you flip it for the bottoms, it's the action to take. And the cards that came up were really I think very accurate for what's going on in our world right now. And they work from the spiritual, the mental, and the physical plane. So on the spiritual level, it says the idealization of cooperation to perfect personal power. And I think with everything we've been seeing in the last few days, all the protests and all that's stirring up for people, it's looking at what is personal power? How do we exercise that in the world? Oh, good morning, Barbara. Thanks for tapping in and saying hi. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. So think about that, the idealization of cooperation to perfect personal power. I've given a lot of thought to power and how we use it. And I can think of all the extremes. We can be in a situation of feeling completely disempowered by others, completely at the mercy of a person or a situation. We can be at the other extreme where we're trying to control everything and everyone to feel good ourselves. And then there's somewhere in the middle where we can start to use power to empower others. We can bring people along on the journey rather than feel like we have to push people aside to get to what's important to us. So I think that when we look at what's going on right now in our society, there's so much frustration. There's so much unrest. And people need outlets, but they don't necessarily always find constructive ways to use those outlets. So it's looking at what is personal power to me? How do I want to express myself in the world? And really, how do I want to express myself in a way that is not only effective, that people will be willing to hear it, but also empowers them? How do we, in other words, as a community, come together to support the people that are struggling? Everybody's got some struggle right now because this is just a really, really hard time to be on the planet. I want you to think about this, though. I really do believe that our souls chose to be here at this time. So as hard as this is, hi, Nina. as my Aunt Nina's not so cool. There's as hard as this is, as difficult as it is for us to live during this experience, I do believe it's part of our soul path. There's so much to be learned from this experience on so many levels. What can we surrender to rather than fight it? What do we need to speak up about? Where do we need to bring our voices up? And how do we do this in a way that is at the highest spiritual level? That's why that line on these cards is showing up on the spiritual path. So whatever we're thinking of doing, as you know, we know emotions are coming up and they're very strong right now on so many levels with so many things going on. How can we do this from a high spiritual level? What is the most loving, most compassionate, most centered way that we can make our voices heard, that we can affect action in the world? And ultimately, can we recognize that we are a global community and we need to do this together? It's not about you versus me. It's not an us or them. In fact, that is what the COVID crisis has taught us. Our very actions, the very breath we take, affects the people around us. How can we tread as gently as we can on the earth? Understanding people do have different ideas and we want to support everybody to communicate. But how can we make sure we're doing it in a way that is engaging and not dividing? And I know that's not always easy, but that's why that sentence is coming at the spiritual level. How do we do that from the highest good, from the highest level of compassion that we have, to exercise power that empowers others, doesn't push anybody down? The next line, which is the mental line on these cards, and I'm just going to, for anybody that's just tuned in, I'm going to show you these cards. So I use a lot of different tarot decks. I've got like over 50. This particular deck is a very interesting one. It has these sentences. So you read across, and of course you always then use your intuition to say, what does this sentence mean for me? And this is the deck, the Karma Cards by Monte Farber. So on the mental line, it says confusion regarding decisions about the mysteries of life. So when I think about the mysteries of life in the current context, I think about the medical crisis because it's evolving. You know, there's a lot of people that are getting frustrated going, you know, first they said to not wear masks, then they said to wear masks, and they said this and they said that. Well, that's what science is like. It evolves. As more is learned, the approach changes. So confusion regarding decisions about the mysteries of life just fits it perfectly with what's going on right now. The fact that this is evolving, and therefore what we do has to evolve with it. It makes as much sense as it can at the time based on what we know. So that mental frustration fits in perfectly with that line. At the physical, we get sacrifice resulting from the fairness shown by a major change. I'm going to read that again. Sacrifice resulting from the fairness shown by a major change. This is what's interesting about this deck, because you get different cards, you get a totally different concept going on, but this is what came up today. Think about it. Sacrifice, having to not circulate as much as we normally will. Getting the vaccination can feel like a sacrifice. But the middle card is talking about fairness shown by a major change. What's fair? Making sure that as many people as possible are helped to stay safe, are helped through this crisis. It is a sacrifice. We may have to make choices we wouldn't normally make. We're having to take action or pull back on things we would normally do. We want the big family gatherings. Can't always do that. The rules change as it goes along. At one point, we're told, sure, you can gather. At another point, sorry, we got to close this down again. Cases are rising. So we can really see on a physical, mental, and spiritual state how all this is playing out. So now I'm going to switch the cards. So we're looking at the bottom, which is about actions we can take. This is what I really love about this deck, is it gives you the situation and then it gives you action steps to take based on what you're dealing with. So I'm going to go this time from the physical up. On the physical level, it says yielding is the only way to do it with your partners and use other people's resources. I'm going to read that again. Yielding is the only way to do it with your partners and use other people's resources. So in other words, sometimes we're having to accept situations that are hard to accept. We're having to do it with the people around us. There's a community effort. And we are using other people's resources. We are so fortunate that we have the medical situation that we do in Canada. I have friends in other parts of the world in developing countries that are fighting, for example, to get vaccinations, to get health care. We know that there's been situations in the world where people are literally turned away because there are no ventilators. You know, you can't breathe and there's no help. So we are using the resources that we're being given by the country that we live in, and we are partnering with everybody. We're not in a bubble. I think in a lot of ways our society has become rather myopic. We think, oh, you know, I'm just taking care of myself. But actually that's impossible. We can't function in this world without other people. There's a wonderful practice that I really love. That's a Buddhist practice. It's called loving kindness. And what you do is you pick something that is benefiting you in some way. So say I pick my top. And then you think about all the people who got out of their beds, left their families for the day, and went to work so you could benefit, so I could be warm, comfortable, and fashionable in my top. So there was a designer, people in fields harvesting cotton, if there's cotton in this, chemists who came up with anything that's not cotton, the people who sewed it together, the people who created the machines that helped to knit and sew, the people who moved product in the warehouse, the people who brought it to the stores, the person in the store who sold it to me. All of those people benefited me. And we might say, well, not literally, but yeah, in a way, because if none of them had gone to work, I wouldn't have my top. I wouldn't be warm. I wouldn't be comfortable. Maybe I wouldn't be fashionable. So when you do that, it starts to engender in you this feeling of, oh, all these people inadvertently cared for me, gave me something that is benefiting me. I think if you use that practice or another, it's really thinking beyond our own little world. We're not living in a world anymore where all the guys get together and help build the barn and all the women bring them sandwiches, when they're doing barn raisings, or, you've got wool and I've got eggs and let's do an exchange. We're not living anymore in that kind of society where everybody pitched in, because if you didn't, your neighbor might not come and help you build that barn. Other people may not exchange with you. We've forgotten that. So I think it's so important that we start really thinking of, we are all in this together. It became something that was said when COVID started, and I know we all hoped this would just be a little blip and we'd be done. But if we don't want this to be endemic, if we don't want this to be something we will live with for the rest of our lives, we've got to work together. And I'm going to be blunt about this. Whether you vaccinate or not, hey, I realize not everybody can or will choose to, but mask and distance, if everybody did that, because you may not get very sick if you're vaccinated, but you can still pass it on. If everybody masked and distanced, we would get out of this. Yes, if you're vaxxed, you're saving hospital beds, and that's fantastic. If you choose not to, it's a choice, but mask and distance. So that's what this is saying. At least this is how I'm reading it. Yielding is the only way to do it with your partners and use other people's resources. We have a lot of support from our governments to get through this. Is it easy? No. Is it sacrifice? Yes. Can we reach out and support other people as much as possible? Absolutely. If you don't normally eat out, go grab a bite at a restaurant or order in, because the restaurants are struggling. Look at who is struggling in your community. How can you support them? Maybe you don't always have the funds to make a purchase. Is there something else you can do? Even just to send a note and say, I'm thinking about you. I'm cheering for you. I care about what you're going through. This is a time for us to come together. So now on the mental level, it says, be prepared to sacrifice for the beauty of getting and using power. I'm going to read that one again. Be prepared to sacrifice for the beauty of getting and using power. A lot of times today, we hear the word entitled, where people feel like they should just be able to get what they want. That is one way of using power, but there's no sacrifice in it. It's, I want what I want, and I don't care who is affected by that. The sacrifice is about our responsibility. With power comes responsibility. So I know when I was a kid in school, a very, very long time ago, we weren't taught just about our rights. We were taught about our responsibilities as citizens. You live in a community, you have a responsibility to it. So that to me is what this line is saying. Be prepared to sacrifice for the beauty of getting and using power. If you are going to take on some sort of a situation in your community where you're coming into a place of power, recognize the responsibility you take on with that. What is your responsibility to the people affected by the power you take? What is the responsibility you take on that's concerning how people are affected by the power that you take on? Right? If we take on responsibility with the idea that we are a global citizen, we want to help the people around us, we're going to do what we can, that's, I consider, a really good use of power, right? It's looking at what is involved here and how can I take my power and use it for the greater good. Okay, on a spiritual level, it says, inspire others with relationships as a life or death issue. I don't think it can get any clearer than that. Inspire others with relationships as a life or death issue. Our relationships with other people now can be a life or death issue. This is really the first time every one of us, has been called upon when we step out our door to think, how am I affecting the people around me? It can literally be, for the vulnerable people in our community, a life or death issue. And that may feel really heavy. I get that. This feels like a really heavy time. But a lot of times when we have to go through these cycles, who we are on the other side of that, how we come out the other end, can be so transformative that it makes everything we're going through now worthwhile if we use this to grow on, right? If we go, I can't just sit in my little bubble and just think about myself and go, hey, if I'm doing okay, I'm okay. I'm walking out the door. How do I affect the people around me? How do I make sure that the difference I make is a positive one to the people around me? How do I walk gently on the earth? Everything that's happening right now is because we haven't taken care of it. How I think a lot of what we're going through now, the earth is changing. We've tipped the balance here. Now it really becomes, how do we adapt? And adaptation is pulling back from gimme, 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 how do I get what I want, to how do I operate in such a way that I am making a contribution. Sure, we all need to receive. We need the energy to operate in the world. But if it's not going back out into the world, it's hoarding. And hoarding, interestingly enough, comes from a fear of lack. If we're hoarding our energy, if we're trying to pile it up for later, then we're actually not part of the cycle of abundance. Because the cycle of abundance is putting energy out there with no attachment to how it comes back to us and working on whatever we need to work on to allow ourselves to receive what does come back. And when it comes to relationships, a lot of times what we've been doing in our society is saying, I gave you this energy. Now, when are you going to give it back to me? But what happens when we let go of how energy comes back to us? Imagine if we were all just giving freely and trusting that it will come back in some way. I think of the whole concept from Pay It Forward, that energy goes out and you have to let go of how it comes back, and it might come back through the 10th person in the chain in a way you never expected. How amazing if we can live in a world from a place of trust, that if we are doing what we can to walk gently on the planet, we're offering what we can to the people around us, we're working on any patterns we have that keep us from receiving. Because if we're not receiving, that's on us. That's something inside of us that says, I don't deserve, I can't have, I'm not lovable. This is my finite little world instead of the expansive universe you actually live in. Coming from a place of, I can see I can offer some energy here. And feeling good about that, knowing that it will come back to you in some way. And sometimes offering energy can be something small that just lifts somebody up. I was going for a walk yesterday past a beautiful sports car, and there was a fellow in it, and I just called out, "That's a very beautiful ride, sir." Big smile on his face. I'm sure that made his day. That's a very small contribution. But it says, hey, I see you. I recognize you. I'm connecting with you. Think about all the people as you pass on the street that you could just give a smile to. Even when you're wearing a mask, you could smile with your eyes. Everybody knows I'm smiling right now, right? Let the people around you know that you see them, that you care. We all do what we can. So that's what I'm getting for this month. It's about recognizing, yes, there's sacrifice. Yes, there's a lot of change going on. Yes, this is hard. But it's also giving us a chance to draw out of us our personal power to make a difference in the world, to connect to others, to uplift others, to allow, through the yielding, ourselves to receive what we need. And I believe we're going through a profound shift. And as we all know, major shifts in society are usually precipitated by crisis. And they're difficult, they're gritty, they're challenging, but on the other side of that, there's so much growth. If we can get out of this with this real sense of community, a real awareness of how we affect the people around us, and a real desire to make a difference as much as we can in our own small way every day, I think we're going to come out of this healthier in our consciousness, happier in that we're going to be more connected with people, and more empowered, knowing that each of us can make a difference. Each of us does make a difference every day. COVID is just really spelling that out for us, leaving no doubt whatsoever that we affect the people around us. Now it's about becoming conscious about how we do that and how we can do it better. So that is my reading. I'm going to stop the video. I'm going to come back on, and anybody that would like me to do a little mini reading for you, I've still got some time, and I'll be back. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.